A seismic shift is rumbling through London. For centuries, this city was the exclusive domain of Britain's old money aristocracy. But its very soul is being redrawn by a new avant-garde of global wealth. Muggles from Moscow and magnates from the Middle East are no longer waiting for an invitation to the club. They're knocking down the doors and buying the building itself. A quiet but rapid transfer of power is underway. Hello and welcome. I'm Beatrice. And if you, like me, are endlessly fascinated by the hidden currents of history and the stories behind the world's most beautiful facades, then you found the right corner of the internet. Because the real question is, how did this happen? How did the world's most entrenched elite lose their grip on their own capital city? Today, we uncover the secret sale of London. To truly answer that, we have to look past the headlines and the sensational sales. This wasn't a sudden coup, it was a slow, quiet surrender. The story of how this happened isn't about a single event, but a gradual unraveling that began decades ago. To understand how the walls of this gilded fortress fell, we first have to examine the cracks that were forming in its very foundation. That is where our story truly begins. And our story begins not with a bang, but with the quiet, deliberate turning of a key in a Belgravia townhouse. Imagine walking through these streets or the neighbouring avenues of Mayfair. There's a particular kind of silence here, isn't there? The roar of London feels a world away. You see the endless rows of creamy white stucco facades, the gleam of polished brass on black doors. This wasn't an accident. This was architecture as dynasty. These were the grounds of families like the Grosvenors and the Cadogans, who didn't just own property, they curated entire districts over centuries, treating swathes of London like a vast generational garden. This is the physical manifestation of old money. It's a world that operates on a different frequency. Its aesthetic, what we might now call quiet luxury, wasn't about the latest handbag. It was about the grandfather clock in the hall that had chimed through 2 world wars, the worn leather of an armchair, the subtle patina on inherited silver. Value wasn't in the price tag, but in the lineage. And this philosophy extended to their entire worldview. The core concept was stewardship. They didn't see themselves as owners in the modern transactional sense. They were caretakers. Owning 1,000 acres in the countryside or a block in central London was less like owning stock in a company and more like being the custodian of a national cathedral. Their timeline wasn't measured in fiscal quarters, but in generations. The goal wasn't to flip an asset for profit, it was to preserve and enhance it, to pass it on to the next generation slightly better than they found it. This long, slow rhythm of inherited wealth was the source of their power. Their influence was patient, woven into the very fabric of the establishment. The House of Lords for a long time was simply the institutional echo of conversations that started in their private drawing rooms. It was a world built on permanence, a fortress of tradition and quiet confidence. But this gilded empire, seemingly eternal, was built on foundations that were about to be tested to their breaking point. And that breaking point didn't arrive with a single dramatic snap. Instead, it was a slow, grinding process, a series of deep cracks appearing in the fortress walls over decades. The first crack wasn't financial, but political. For centuries, the House of Lords, staffed by hereditary peers, was the ultimate safety valve for the aristocracy. They could veto any law they felt threatened their world. But in 1911, the Parliament Act stripped them of that power. It was a subtle but profound shift. For the first time, their inherited authority was legally curbed. The message was clear. Power by birthright was no longer absolute. Then came the wars. World War I and then a second, even more devastating conflict bled the aristocracy dry. It wasn't just the tragic loss of sons and heirs on the battlefields of the Somme. It was the crushing cost. Country estates were turned into hospitals, and vast tracts of land were sold off to fund the war effort. Generations of accumulated heritage, paintings, sculptures, entire libraries were auctioned away, not for profit, but for survival. It was a forced liquidation of their identity. But perhaps the deepest crack, the one that shook the very foundations of their wealth, was the decision in 1931 to abandon the gold standard. To understand this, you have to understand the old money mindset. Their entire fortune was like a magnificent ship safely moored in a calm, protected harbour. That mooring, that anchor, was gold. Every pound sterling in their bank was a claim on a fixed amount of physical gold. It was real, stable, and predictable. But in a desperate attempt to navigate a global depression, the government cut the rope. Suddenly, their ship was adrift in a stormy, unpredictable open sea. The value of money was no longer tied to anything tangible. It could be printed, manipulated, and devalued. This unleashed the monster of inflation, a slow, invisible thief that eroded the value of the very assets they held most dear, the fixed income from their land and their government bonds. The bedrock of their security had turned to quicksand. And the final blow? The post-war government. A new political consensus emerged, one that saw hereditary wealth not as a social anchor, but as an injustice. Exorbitant inheritance taxes were introduced, at one point reaching a staggering 80%. This was a direct assault on the principle of dynasty itself, making it nearly impossible to pass down the great estates intact from one generation to the next. The old fortress was battered, its political power was curbed, its coffers were drained, its financial bedrock was shattered, and its very future was being taxed out of existence. The walls were breached, the foundations were crumbling. All it needed now was one final decisive push to bring the whole structure down. And that push came not with a whisper, but with a bang. The year was 1986. The architect was Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. The event was officially called financial deregulation, but history remembers it by its explosive nickname, the Big Bang. In one move, the old clubby world of the London Stock Exchange was dismantled. The fortress walls that had protected the city for centuries were not just breached, they were dynamited. Out went the old boys' networks and face-to-face trading. In came computerized systems, global competition, and, most importantly, an open invitation for foreign capital to flood the city. London had deliberately transformed itself into a magnet for the world's money, no matter its origin. The first tremors were felt almost immediately. Just 2 years later, in 1988, the iconic Savoy Hotel, a bastion of British luxury, saw a significant stake bought by Prince Al Walid bin Talal of Saudi Arabia. It was a sign. The crown jewels were no longer in a vault, they were in the shop window. Then came the 90s, a decade that poured gasoline on the fire. A deep recession, followed by 1992's Black Wednesday, saw the British pound get hammered on the currency markets. For foreign investors holding dollars or yen, this was a fire sale. Suddenly, everything in Britain, from prestigious companies to historic properties, was available at a steep discount. The weakened old money couldn't compete. The newly empowered global money couldn't resist. The transfer of assets became a flood. But it was in 2003 that a single transaction took place that, for many ordinary people, symbolized the entire shift more powerfully than any corporate merger. It wasn't a bank or a factory or a piece of land. It was Chelsea Football Club. You have to understand, for millions of people, a football club isn't a business. It's a tribe. It's an identity passed down from your grandfather to your father to you. It's a weekly ritual of hope and despair, a sacred piece of community that feels permanent in a changing world. It represents a piece of home. And then Roman Abramovich arrived. The purchase wasn't just a financial act, it was a cultural one. Here was a new money oligarch from the former Soviet Union buying one of England's most storied clubs. It was the ultimate statement. It proved that the new money didn't just want to own London's assets, it wanted to own its passions, its culture, its heart. The sale of Chelsea F.C. was the moment the abstract numbers of global finance became a felt reality in pubs and living rooms across the country. It was the final, undeniable proof that the old London was gone. The transfer of power was complete. The new kings had been crowned. But what did their kingdom actually look like? What did it feel like to live in this new London? It felt different, faster, sharper, less like a home and more like a line item on a balance sheet. The entire philosophy of ownership had changed. The old guard, for all their faults, operated on a principle of stewardship. They saw their London estates as a legacy, a garden to be tended over generations. The new money saw London differently. It was the ultimate portfolio asset, a blue-chip stock in the marketplace of global cities, calibrated for immediate dividends. This wasn't just an abstract financial shift, you could see it, feel it, right on the street. Imagine a quiet corner in Mayfair around 1980. The air holds the scent of old leather from a bespoke shoemaker, the gentle murmur from a pub that served locals for a century. It's the picture of understated, lived-in elegance. Now let that image dissolve. The same corner today. The pub is gone, replaced by a glass-fronted gallery showcasing art as an investment class. The shoemaker shop is now the flagship store for a Swiss watch brand, its windows clinically bright. The buildings are the same, but the soul has been traded out. This wasn't gentrification, it was a personality transplant. And this transplant came with profound political questions. As figures like Dubai's Sultan Ahmed bin Sulayem bought up critical infrastructure, or Qatar's Sheikh Hamad bin Jassim bin Jaber Al Thani acquired iconic department stores and swathes of the financial district, a disquieting question began to surface. Who truly runs London? The elected officials in Parliament, or the global magnates who own the very ground it stands on? The lines of influence became blurred, creating a new, subtle form of power that didn't need a seat in the House of Lords to be felt. This is where the change becomes undeniable. The new foreign billionaires, brandishing their financial influence like artists with brushes, were recoloring London's identity. A splash of Dubai's vertical ambition here, a stroke of Moscow's assertive luxury there. The old, muted tones of tweed and tradition were being painted over with the bold, primary colours of global capital. The result is a city wrestling with an existential conundrum, richer than ever on paper, but perhaps poorer in spirit. A dazzling global hub that, to some, feels increasingly like it belongs to everyone and therefore to no one. And so we arrive at the end of this century-long story. We've watched as a city, once the unshakable domain of a landed aristocracy, was slowly, then suddenly, ceded to a new global elite. A story of wars and taxes chipping away at old foundations, culminating in the financial Big Bang that blew the doors wide open. It's more than just a transfer of assets, it's a fundamental reconfiguration of the city's very DNA. This brings us back to that existential conundrum, and I'd love to know where you stand on it. What is your opinion on the changing face of London? Do you celebrate it as a truly global city that is able to change with the times, or do you long for a past where it was a bit more contained? Please share your thoughts below. I'm genuinely curious to read them. If you enjoy these deep dives into the hidden worlds of wealth and culture, The old, muted tones of tweed and tradition were being painted over with the bold, primary colors of global capital. The result is a city wrestling with an existential conundrum, richer than ever on paper, but perhaps poorer in spirit. A dazzling global hub that, to some, feels increasingly like it belongs to everyone and therefore to no one. And so we arrive at the end of this century-long story. We've watched as a city, once the unshakable domain of a landed aristocracy, was slowly, then suddenly, ceded to a new global elite. A story of wars and taxes chipping away at old foundations, culminating in the financial Big Bang that blew the doors wide open. It's more than just a transfer of assets, it's a fundamental reconfiguration of the city's very DNA. This brings us back to that existential conundrum, and I'd love to know where you stand on it. What is your opinion on the changing face of London? Do you celebrate it as a truly global city that is able to change with the times, or do you long for a past where it was a bit more contained? Please share your thoughts below. I'm genuinely curious to read them. Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next investigation. It truly helps us continue this journey of discovery together.